Hi everybody and good evening and welcome to the Ocean Grove Community Association annual general meeting, followed by our guest speaker, Lawry St. Ledger. Just a couple of housekeeping points. I'll just keep watching the screen to see additional people joining and let them in through the waiting room function. I would ask you to put your microphones on mute to eliminate background noise or embarrassing Zoom moments. And we will be recording the meeting tonight. So if you don't want to appear in the recording facially, then just turn your camera off. I begin tonight by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in our Zoom meeting tonight. There are two aspects of our meeting tonight: the Ocean Grove Community Association annual general meeting, which will be followed immediately by our guest speaker. Our AGM is generally short, but it's an essential part of the association business to comply with the Corporations Act requirements. It usually takes about 15 or so minutes. If you have a question at any time during the AGM, please raise your hand using the Zoom tab function. I declare the Ocean Grove Community Association 2022 AGM open and welcome all members and other attendees. There are a number of apologies received from members tonight. Now, members were emailed the agenda and the financial reports on the 8th of July, almost a month ahead of this meeting as required. First on the agenda is confirmation of the 2021 AGM minutes. A copy of the minutes was previously emailed to all members. And a proposal from
what's happening here?
Noel, can you go to mute? There you go. Confirmation of the 2021 AGM minutes. A proposal by Gordon King and seconded by Noel Emsel that the previous minutes be accepted. Any members opposed? If so, raise your hand. Using the Zoom functionality. No? All right, carried. The next item on the agenda is Chairperson's report. Newsletters were produced during the year and are on our website, so should you care to read them. So I would just like to touch on a couple of key points from our activities during the year. The Bellarine distinctive areas and landscapes, the DAO. Members will know that we have put significant effort into ensuring that the community's views were heard on this, and I'd like to acknowledge in particular Ian McCartney his commitment to leading our association's efforts on the Bellarine DAO. His knowledge and experience was invaluable. The current situation with the Bellarine DAO is that the independent advisory panel appointed by the Minister for Planning to review one single part of the draft statement of planning policy, that is the town settlement boundaries, has completed its report and has been sent on the 8th of July to the recently appointed new Minister for Planning to make her decision. As you know, the Bellarine DAO was a government election promise at the last state election. We await that outcome. However, we continue to push our local representative, Lisa Neville, to get the decision made and to honour the government's promise. That in mind, and given that we are in the decision cycle, I just want to raise 2 points. The combined Bellarine Community Associations are conducting a rally on Sunday, the 14th of August at 10:30 at Edwards Point, St Leonards. And that's being organised by the combined Bellarine Community Associations for all associations across the Bellarine. So I'm just going to let someone in. As a warm-up and to gain some additional media coverage, we've got a smaller, more localised activity occurring this Friday at 10 o'clock at the Ocean Grove Nature Reserve on Grub Road. We have a Times group reporter coming along to take some words and to take some pictures to give us some additional PR coverage in the lead up to the main event on the 14th of August. Clearly, we want to send a message through both those activities that we seek the government to honour their promises on the Bellarine Dow. Given we're in the decision cycle with the minister or alternative minister, it may be, we want to make sure that the government doesn't forget and that we remind them of the strong community views about the settlement boundaries and the Bellarine protection. The second point I wanted to touch on in the chairperson's report is the Ocean Grove Principal Pedestrian Network. We were pleased to see council finally make a decision on the Principal Pedestrian Network for Ocean Grove after 7 years. We pushed hard for a decision to be made, and we also pushed for the cost to be better than the standard 50-50 cost sharing model that council has. The outcome of what is now a 65-35 cost share model reduced affected ratepayers' costs by about $100 per ratepayer. Whilst not our perfect outcome, better than the original position put forward by council. The Principal Pedestrian Network rollout plan is over 3 years for the 23 kilometres of footpaths, with construction programmed to commence in 2024, with next year being final planning, tendering and so on. Now, affected ratepayers, those who have got to pay the special rates charge, will have received a letter in the mail last month with the year-by-year schedule for the rollout. The next point is, I guess, our relationship with council, which we think is good, reasonable to good. Members of the committee, along with members of the Ocean Grove Business Association, met with council about 2 weeks ago to discuss a range of issues and questions we'd put forward to council. A copy of the written response from council is on our website under the news tab. Overall, it was a positive meeting, and we were pleased to see that what we thought was a range of things in the urban design framework that weren't progressing are in fact progressing, but at a much slower rate than we would have thought, given the design framework came out in 2015. That concludes the key points out of my chairperson's report. Noella McLean and Ian McCartney have proposed and seconded the chair's report to be accepted. Anybody against that, please raise your hand. No, carried. Financial report. As certainly the committee knows, and most members, we always run a skinny budget, only fundraising when we need to. Our balance at the end of our operating year, which is the 31st of March 2022, was $3,718.70. And a copy of our financial report was emailed to all members in July, along with the other AGM papers. Now, of the $3,718, $1,500 is still earmarked to donate to the Ocean Grove Community Garden in due course to help them support installation of a battery. As you'll know, we, through our solar program, paid for the installation of solar panels on 2 locations in Ocean Grove. One was the Senior Citizens Building, which backs onto the community garden, and they've agreed to an energy benefit sharing activity. Our balance of today is $3,373.70. We're always open to new members, and membership is a one-off $10. I would like to move the financial report, and Liz Patterson has seconded the financial report be accepted. Anybody against the financial report being accepted? No, thank you, carried. Before we move on to election of committee members, are there any questions from any members or participants in the Zoom meeting? If you could put your hand up. No, can't see any hands. Okay, thank you. We now move on to election of committee members. Thank you to all the hardworking committee team for their willingness to put up their hand to be part of a good team. Each has brought unique skills and qualities essential to forming a good functioning committee that looks for opportunities and we believe achieves outcomes on behalf of the community. We bid farewell to committee member Carla Pascoe, who's not standing for the committee this time round. Carla, on behalf of the members of the committee and more broadly the membership of the Community Association, thank you very much for your efforts and inputs over the last couple of years. You are most welcome to join the team again anytime in the future. I now declare all committee positions vacant. The following have nominated and have been seconded to be elected as the committee members for 22-23. Belle Campbell, Warren Chapman, Noel Empsall, Phil Edwards, Gordon King, Ian McCartney, Noella McLean, Andy McCoy, Liz Patterson, Ian Rabone, and Grace Whittington. I've received no other nominations. However, there are additional positions available should anyone wish to join the committee team at any time. Given no other nominations, I declare all nominations listed as elected. Election of the office bearers. The required officer bearer positions are chairperson, secretary, and treasurer. Nominations have been received for chairperson from Andy McCoy. Andy, thank you with all of my heart. Secretary, I'm nominating for secretary, and Noel has fronted up for yet another year as our treasurer. There being no other nominations received, therefore the nominees are elected. I'd now like to hand over to Andy McCoy as our new chairperson to say a few words as he chooses and introduce our guest speaker. Andy, over to you.
I would like to thank Phil for his tireless service as the chairperson. Phil took over the chairperson role in early 2018 when our previous chairperson, Michael Harbour, became very ill and has been the chairperson since. He's done an excellent job. He works tirelessly. It's great. I really thank Phil for everything he's done. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Lawry St. Ledger. Lawry was the Dean of the Faculty of Health at Deakin University for 7 years and has also worked extensively with the World Health Organization in supporting national and international health-related programs in Europe, Asia and North America. Lawry will speak on a range of health-related topics with a focus on connection to nature and the benefits to and impacts on youth learning of such connections, including Australian and international developments and experiences in that space, and on social media and youth learning. Welcome, Lawry. We are now in your hands.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just going to take you on a brief journey through my experience, and I'm going to highlight public health issues from me being an insider and making mistakes and learning a whole lot. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the future generation, because my research focus is on building the health and well-being of children and adolescents. And I just want to share with you some of the stories and also some of the significant findings. So there's a number of anecdotes, and I'm going to just not touch those at the moment, but if you want to ask me about some of them, I shall. I was a teacher initially in rural Victorian schools, taught biology, loved it because there was a new curriculum and it had changed from being all about anatomy, physiology and biochemistry, there was some of that in there, to an ecological perspective and about nature. And so this was my first embedding into the issue of our natural environment and how all the things intersected. I was qualified in mathematics, but I hated teaching and I had no passion. I loved teaching science, except astronomy and geology, where I had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. So the physics, chemistry and biological parts of general science I could handle. So then I went to teach science and biology in a large metropolitan school. Now, around about this time, some of you may recall, there was a National Royal Commission into Human Relationships. Funnily enough, a number of the commissioners were swimmers. Two of them were from the Australian swimming team. Won't go into the background for that. But this one particularly started to shape a whole lot of things about interpersonal relationships in the community and around health and well-being. The principal of the school I was at the time sent me to the University of Melbourne, which had received money to run, Commonwealth money, to run programs for the health, education, welfare sector, and also for the faith-based organisations around health and human relationships. It was a year-long course. I did it part-time. It was absolutely fabulous meeting these people from different professional groups, etc. But as a young man, I wanted to go overseas and I wanted to case the joint of Europe, meet some of my friends over there, have a good time. But what I did to get leave was to tell the principal I'd organised with the Swedish Institute and the British Council for them to do an itinerary for me and visits and immerse me in some of the developments going on there, as well as having a good time in London. So when I came home, I was contacted by the University of Melbourne to join the team at what the centre that was running these programs was the Social Biology Resources Centre. I headed up by the charismatic Della Sargent. Many of you would know of her. Sadly, she passed away about 3 years ago. And so because I had an educational background, a lot of the money was about supporting education, particularly in the school sector. And so all of this was happening, and I was all of a sudden an associate lecturer at the University of Melbourne. Didn't have my doctoral degree at that stage. And I was paid by the money that came from the Commonwealth, which went to the Counselling, Guidance and Clinical Services Division of the Ministry of Education. And then I was seconded to the team at the University of Melbourne. Now, the nice thing about that, besides learning and teaching and meeting all these people, was I could go back to study. So I went back and studied public health, particularly the development of public health and the history of public health, and all the stuff around cholera, typhoid, etc. And I had the pleasure of visiting the Broad Street Pump some years ago in London, where John Snow did all his famous work. Won't go into all of that. But the other thing I did in going back to study, I wanted to study psychology. I wanted to learn about the human being and all the different developments of the mind. So I did that. It was certainly better than teaching maths. At the same time, around about this, Dick Hamer was Premier of Victoria, and he had a policy. It's fascinating how various leaders shaped direction for a number of years. And Dick Hamer, small L Liberal, was very much involved in quality of life issues. And he wanted, with the support of his cabinet, health and human relationships to be taught in schools. And he also wanted health to be expanded just away from what's known as the jocks, the physical education. I don't use that in the pejorative sense, because some brilliant work is and has been done by the physical educators, but he wanted a broader aspect of that. So all of a sudden I found myself appointed as officer in charge of the Health and Human Relations unit in the Ministry of Education. My first contact with groups, as opposed to teaching about it, was when the then Assistant Minister, Norman Lacey, who had the responsibility for the rollout of the Health and Human Relationships program, said to me he had an invitation from down in Geelong to go and meet some parents in the community. He said, "It'll be a small meeting, do you want to come?" And I remembered this vividly. First thing I remembered vividly was a black shiny car with a driver pulled up at our home in Mount Waverley. No neighbours were there to see me. The driver said, "Get in the back seat. The minister will sit in the front. We've got to go and pick him up." So we came down the highway and we were at Matthew Flinders. It was the location, because there was a school hall there. When we got near, Norman Lacey turned around and said, "Who do all these buses belong to?" And the driver said, I said, "I don't know." So we got out of the car, we were met, and we were escorted through huge crowds. The hall, all the seats were taken. We got there about 15 minutes before it was due to start, and there was hardly any standing room. They were packed cheek by jowl. So this was my first entree into external groups trying to have a shape on public health, because what was there was the representatives of a newly formed group in Victoria, the CPA. Now, not the Communist Party of Australia Victorian branch, it was the Concerned Parents Association. And they were formed deliberately to aggressively oppose any teaching of health and human relationships in schools. So Norman made a bit of a speech. Interestingly, his boss, the education minister at the time was Alan Hunt, who was very supportive. And as many of you would know, Alan was the father of Greg Hunt, the recently retired health minister. So we had terrific support from senior people in the government and in the Labor opposition at the time. But we had this experience of people getting up asking questions. Most of the questions were framed around quotations from the Old Testament. And Norman and I were sitting together, just two people on stage, and he whispered to me, "How do you answer this question?" And I remember saying to him once, "You had better have a go at it, because you know more than me." Norman, before he became a politician, was a teacher of humanities, but he'd also been an Anglican vicar. He had higher status because whilst I was raised an Anglican in St John's, East Malvern, very low church, he at least could handle some scripture. I could not understand Old Testament when I was going to church. And so it was all quoted to us around the Old Testament. Only later did we discover that all this so-called research came from fundamentalist groups in certain parts of the southern states of the US. None of it had been published, and none of it had any authenticity other than with this group. So when we got back to Melbourne, Norman said, "That's the last meeting I'm attending." He said, "You're on your own." And I went to my colleagues in counselling, guidance and clinical services, and I said, "We're obligated to do some talks around the state." And they said, "Well, we'll give you some psychologists to come with you. They're in training for their clinical registration." So I and a number of psychologists toured the Wimmera, where we had sellout crowds, if you could call that, in Repugnant, for goodness sakes, and right through the Wimmera over a whole week. Again, buses from all over Victoria. And then we did Gippsland, and then we drew stumps. And so to do a parallel today, there are a whole lot of alternative facts, and I only learned this in the last few years from one of the august intellectuals and thinkers and critical thinkers in society, a man called Donald J. Trump. And so we were confronted with all of this and not knowing how to answer it, because all our evidence that we had at the time was nothing like this, and it was couched in religious phrases and terms where both of us, with a Christian upbringing and being anchored in the Anglican Church, had no idea. So anyway, it all, things panned out, and health and human relationships was taught and was developed in many ways. If you want, I can comment on some of that a bit later. A few years later, I was asked to apply for a position as Deputy Manager of the Health Promotion Unit in the Health Department, because the two previous senior people who resigned, not with any controversy, they went on to other things, were both medicos, and they wanted one of us to be a medico and one of us to be an educator. So I was the educator, and a man called Dan Russell was the medico, who had a career in advertising before he became a medico. So the mix was quite right. The Health Promotion Unit, we got to about 80 in numbers because we worked on all sorts of things. Exciting stuff, one of the most exciting periods of my life. Tobacco reduction. And you would remember the controversies over where the cricket was sponsored by Benson and Hedges, the tennis by Marlborough, I think I'm right, and taking away the right for that sponsorship from those two sports. They said, we will go under, we will never get anyone to do it. Well, look at it now with the status of cricket around the world, and in particular Australian cricket, and also the magnificence of our national tennis competition. So this was exciting. A lot of the work that was done behind the scenes was by a group called Bugger Up, B-U-G, billboard users against graffiti and unhealthy products. And these people went around at night in balaclavas with step ladders defacing all the tobacco signs. I only found out later, and a book's been written about this, most of them were medicos, some very august medicos in terms of their status now, but they got in there and they put these very humorous messages on that. All of a sudden, we were handling these different things, and then along came AIDS. Now, there's lots of parallels with COVID when we come to AIDS. It was on a smaller scale, but we needed to get public information out dramatically and quickly. And we did that, and we needed to be about the transmission. In the health department, we set up a hotline for people to phone in questions. See, there was no social media, so it had to be by phone. And the hotline constantly had questions. One of the classics was, I was shopping the other day and the person in front of me had a supermarket trolley and I accidentally touched it and I think they were gay. And so we had to train people up to handle all these diverse things and to anchor people back into the science, because the transmission was mucous membrane to mucous membrane, bodily fluids, and you don't get things off a supermarket trolley or brushing past someone that you may perceive to have AIDS. There was also some stigmatisation, etc., etc. So we had to work with risk groups, and we needed to do contact tracing. Now, the contact tracing that we did in COVID, we ran out of contact tracers very quickly, and contact tracing is complex. We didn't have as much computer technology then as we had now, and also it didn't develop to the size that COVID developed. The treatment for AIDS was not readily available, and to our credit internationally, we've been able to get vaccines at various levels of efficacy, and antivirals. But generally, my take is that's been pretty good. So it was an exciting thing. I managed the educational arm of the AIDS thing for the government, and I remember the Minister of Health at the time telling me that the health department, the health ministry were funding a lot of community groups. And he said, we've tried to put money to the key groups and for allow them to own it and do things. Now, the key groups basically were people with blood issues, and groups like the Haemophiliac Society. There was an infrastructure there, the blood bank. So that was reasonable. The only 4 key groups, actually: the sex industry, and that had recently been regulated. So it was legalised, regulated, and no person going into a brothel, even before AIDS, and certainly after, was going to get away with not using a condom. The management just insisted, if you come in this store, you will use condoms. As a little aside, we had relationships with Ansell, who produced millions of condoms very rapidly at cheap prices. And this is how you connect with the business community, because we needed to have the resources there. And we saw some of the early arguments around COVID. Are there enough vaccines? Are they in the right place, etc.? But certainly in this one, condoms were not an issue. The other industry area was the gay community, and this was the big one. And over time, I learnt that the infrastructure in the gay community was incredible. I met these subgroups: the gay doctors, the gay clergy, the gay bikies, the gay actors, and a whole lot of other subgroups. And they were able to source money independently of government, but a lot of them relied on some of them top up from government, and to get messages out to their network. And so that was done superbly. It was just fabulous. If you want to ask a question later on, I've spent time in prison, and I spent time in gay Melbourne by night for a long period of time, and I'll tell you the stories about that. When I talked about prisons, AIDS was a significant issue in prisons, but if you want me to talk about that, I'll tell you how we handled it. At the time, the Grim Reaper, the awareness raising thing. Now, we haven't had really big awareness raising things in COVID. We haven't had too many scare tactics. Scare tactics are risky in health promotion. They may work. They work pretty well in the road toll, pretty well in that area. They don't work well in obesity. They don't work well in a number of areas of health, but they work well in certain areas. For example, in sun protection, it's not scare tactics, there's a subtlety there, but the one that works brilliantly is the no hat, no play for young people, which establishes behaviours when people are young. So our dilemma here in AIDS, all these states and territories were working with the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth wanted a television advertising awareness raising program, and they chose the Grim Reaper. And I remember sitting with, we had a big meeting, it was here in Melbourne, of all the constituencies. Basically, the constituencies thought this was too scary, and we thought it would create the worried well. And it did, the worried well. The Monday after it started, and the Tuesday and Wednesday, at the STD clinic in Melbourne, there were queues hundreds of metres down the street, mainly men who had travelled in the last 3 or 4 years overseas and stopped off coming home in an Asian city. And you can guess why they were being checked. And so I remember one of the senior people in the public health area telling me it cost 1.2 million for the first few days in unnecessary testing. And so one of the outcomes one has to watch in a lot of these big health things is creating the worried well. And we've seen elements of that around COVID, etc. But as a public health intervention, AIDS, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Now, we learned a lot, and we learned how to move quickly, but the dilemma with COVID was there was a shortage of people, because the public health division, when I was in health promotion in the health department, was only 9 people, headed up by the wonderful Graham Rauch. And a lot of it was around measles, mumps, rubella, where we're on the same floor, health promotion unit, and public health. And so when AIDS hit, we didn't have the significant infrastructure in the public health, and we had to cobble together people from research and a whole lot of areas to do this. And you saw this play out before us in Victoria, where Jerome Werner was seconded. The logistics were really important. I mean, this was the whole population. we also had we had to get people up to speed about all the phone lines and all the social media about the science behind COVID. So I had 8 years in the health promotion unit. I'm very excited to be involved in helping to establish QUIT. But we also had policies and programs on healthy eating and nutrition, trying to lower the salt in food. We still struggle with that. By gee, if only we could get the salt lowered in food, make a huge difference to people's health and well-being and reduce morbidity and mortality. And also, we were working a lot on physical activity initiatives, but across the span, just not for those who are already active, the age span. And there was a really big increased focus on what was then called mental health, which has now moved away. And shortly, I'm just going to tell you how I've written about this area and taken away what I think is a wrong description of this area in using mental health. In the evenings, I taught at the different universities, Melbourne, Monash, Deakin, La Trobe, Swinburne, and I then found I was seconded from Deakin University, asked me to come and work with them on a secondment to set up a degree in health promotion. So did that. In the meantime, I was able to finish my master's and doctoral degree, both in and around public health but and then all of a sudden the environment kicked in. So I'm trying to marry a number of themes in my life but we've been experiencing recently around public health, the pandemic, around the environment, and around young people, and particularly their vulnerabilities. And so there was a conversation one day from my EA whilst I was dean. Her husband worked in Parks Victoria, and he said to Felicia, "Can you get Lawry on the job, because we've got a new CEO and he's challenging our logo, healthy parks, healthy people." And he's asked the question, he said, intuitively, it sounds okay to me, but he said, is there any scientific evidence behind it? And he said, and so John said, oh, I know a group of people who might be able to get an answer for you. So we got a contract, it wasn't huge. And people who worked with me on it, Marty Townsend, who was from the School of Health and Social Development. She was already working in that space. Peter Brown, moved him over from, he's an ecologist and environmentalist in the Faculty of Science, and me with my background. But what we needed desperately in times like this was somebody skilled to do a literature review. And we had a student, Cecily Miller, who was partway through her doctoral degree. She just needed a bit of a pause. Her doctoral degree was in this area. She needed a small pause. And so she did our lit review. We gave that report to Parks Victoria. We found in a very short period of time about 600 reputable studies in the world, and this is going back 20 or more years, on the evidence of your health being enhanced by being in nature. Just incredible. So since that time, healthy parks, healthy people has been there. It's been adapted in other countries right around Australia. We then thought we should publish this in the academic literature like good academics, and we did. And to the shock of all of us, but the gratitude, all of us, it's the one publication that we've all written many papers and chapters in books in our different areas. It's the one publication that's been cited more than any other, thousands and thousands of times. And here we are Wednesday, and I'm connected to ResearchGate, which tells you all the things I've ever written, who has included it in their book or in their peer-refereed journal paper that's in one of the journals. And this week, I had 2 papers that were from the Middle East. There's not much grass and greenery over there. And another one from a South American country who had read this and cited us. So it was just an incredible response in terms of how we've been so pleased that this paper, now dated out 20 or more years out of date. However, the evidence is still strong, very strong. So just to finish, Cecily's now a professor at RMIT University, and she's doing brilliant work making changes to leading teams to bring back nature in the inner urban areas of Melbourne, working with architects and the municipalities and the community groups and all the cultural groups. Biologically, Phil would know this, biologically as humans, as animals, we are adapted to living in nature. And we put this in our CBCA submission to the recent Dell hearing. It goes like this, very simple. If you think of the time as humans we've been on Earth, we've actually lived in nature up until 3 p.m. on December the 31st. For the 9 hours to midnight, New Year's Eve, we've lived in towns and cities. So we've lived 9 hours out of 60 hours in that model in nature. We are biologically adapted to nature. No wonder when people go into nature, they feel so healthy. Now, some parts of nature are better. I just want to conclude on some of these fascinating things. And this one is not a surprise. If nature has got fresh water, a pond, a river, a creek, if it's got open spaces for grazing animals, growing crops, if it's got some timber and it's got it collected in a little wood for shelter, protection, building materials, that is the best form of nature. And all the evidence says putting people into that for a little while, many indicators are used, blood pressure, heartbeat rate, a whole raft of things, objective and then subjective things. That's the one that stands out. And that's because we survived living in those environments. So in the final thing, my international expertise is about child and adolescent health and promoting the health and well-being of young people. And we do this across the world in different settings. And I can show you this. This particular book came out a little while ago, and the settings where people's health and well-being are addressed, and you will recognise some of this because Ocean Grove is part of this. We've got healthy towns and cities, and there's international movements and everything, doing things on that. Huge amount of research on how to make things work. I won't go into the details, but it's just superb in terms of crime rates lowering if you improve the network, productivity in industry, business going through the roof. Huge number of metrics. We have health promoting schools, which is my area. We have health promoting hospitals, which seems a bit strange, but see, hospitals are basically for treatment and cure, but there's international movements on health promoting hospitals, health promoting higher education, health promoting workplaces, dramatic around the world in all countries. And people, I can tell you stories about what's happened here in Victoria, where some small factories actually became health promoting and did various things. They were able to decrease the work hours of their staff because productivity went through the roof and reduced turnover. So there's all these outcomes. Health promoting prisons. Again, the data is brilliant. Recidivism drops dramatically. People seem to get better jobs, etc. Health promotion in sports settings, and we've got some of these doing well in Australia, where genders are being combined, and we see this often in rural areas where basketball, netball, football, all combined, etc., to do different things. Alcohol regulation involving cross-section of people involved. And then, of course, recent ones, the digital environment and social media. Ooh, boy, gee, that's a challenge. And then emerging settings. I just want to tell you a few of these. Healthy airports. And seeing what we've seen on TV recently, yes, we need that. And then the climate change agenda, making settings a little bit different. And then places of worship. They're called nested settings. So in conclusion, I wrote a little thing a few years ago about our health, and I was asked to, and I kept going. Oh, so I wrote something about health because I was asked to write a chapter in a book, not this book, another book some years ago about young people's health and well-being, and I was a bit aghast that it was still being defined in terms of ILTH, ILLTH, which is, some people might know, medical nemesis that was written by, who wrote medical nemesis? I've forgotten. But it was trying to get away from the ILTH perspective, which is how our health department, where I work, was mainly the ILTH department. Not a criticism, that's where the money is. It's only 5% of the health budget ever in promoting health and well-being. So I thought we've got a lot of areas of health, but what's said about it in the literature and what do the experts say? So this took me some time to get together. I just want to read you this little bit. Physical health. I reckon there are 6 areas of health. Physical health, when the body is functioning as it was supposed to function. Emotional health, which is self-esteem, security, self-actualization, and the expression of emotions in assertive and respectful ways. Social health, the relationships and interactions an individual has with others and with social institutions. Now, emotional health and social health are often under the umbrella of mental health. I'd rather talk about separately. And then spiritual health, the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Environmental health, the components of the natural and the built environment, the physical, chemical, biological, affecting individual behaviours and physical state. And then one we forget about, intellectual health, our cognitive capacities, particularly the ability to access knowledge, understand it, analyse the information, synthesise the facts, evaluate the applications of the knowledge, and create new ideas and solutions. It's tended to be called health literacy recently. So it's all these 6 components that make up with our health and well-being. So my international expertise is building the health and well-being of young people primarily, and it's basically focused on the school as a setting, but it still takes me into different environments, climates around health, and also it's been connecting me recently, as it always has, around health crises like pandemics, epidemics, etc. So I'll keep quiet. I've got lots of stories if you want to hear them or respond to your questions. That's, yeah, I'll probably have a little drink here. It's water.
Thanks very much, Lawry. That was fascinating. Can I ask the first question?
Yeah, sure.
Gay Melbourne at night sounded interesting.
Okay. The 3 gays, we had many gays deliberately seconded into the health department. We wanted people from the different communities. We had people from the blood communities, etc. We had people from the IV user community, not the users so much, but the people who work with on the streets and so on. One time the gay said, "We've all been working together, it's terrific, but you straights have never experienced Gay Melbourne." So they said, "We'll take 3 straights on Gay Melbourne by night." So I left Pam at 7:30, one of the other straights, Collingwood. Pam said to me, "What time will you be home?" I said, "Oh, about 10:30. I got home at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, and she said to me, "You smell." And I'd been in so many different venues with various aromatic substances that my clothes, all my clothes, had an amalgam of different chemicals, etc. It was brilliant. We were taken to theatre groups. We were taken to brothels. Every time we went anywhere, we couldn't get in unless they gave us condoms. Pam said, "What's in your pocket?" on Sunday morning. And there's all these condoms. So it was the music. We went to a big music venue down in St Kilda. It must have been 2 o'clock in the morning. Place is jumping. And I was standing there, and one of the other straights was dancing with one of the gays from our group. And I looked up, and there was a DJ in the middle, and he had a magnificent woman with him whose lovely long hair. I could see all of this. So I thought, she's standing there, I'll go and ask her for a dance. And so I went up tapped her on the shoulder. I hadn't seen her face. I tapped her on the shoulder, and he turned around and said, "Yes, I'm happy to dance with you." So, I had all these images and stereotypes, etc., but came back absolutely. The minister later in the week said to me, he knew we went, and he said, "What was it like?" I said, "Don't worry about the infrastructure in the gay community. They've all got a bit of money. They're on the same page. They reckon the government and the opposition are doing a fantastic job, and we'll get on top of this." So there was this sense of camaraderie, community, and the people there, as all of them were, respect. We were respected, and we were allowed to do things in our own way. I've just finished now. The minister earlier had said there will be publications coming out. He said, "I don't want to see them, Lawry. You're my censor. All the things that have been funded by government money, you have to clear. I put you in charge of that." So basically most of it was all right, but some of the more explicit stuff from the gay community, I remember meeting with them one day. I thought, "You've got to explain this to me. I don't understand what all this means." And then I said, I've got to put on the minister's hat. If a question is asked in Parliament, did the government fund it? He's got to be able to get up and answer appropriately. What do you think I should write for him if this becomes public? And so anyway, we did compromises, and that was a good way of getting it through. But the outcome was fantastic.
Thanks, Lawry. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Thanks, Andy. Liz Patterson here, Lawry.
Hi, Liz.
One of the things I'm interested in is, I've really enjoyed the thing about connecting to nature. And all my work in coastal and marine management, I find that people are so passionate about their beach and their area. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is how do we map that so that we can link it to planning schemes, which then, so it's there as part of the discussion amongst, environmental issues and siting and design issues, when the decisions are being made in council or whatever that looks like, because so much of our environment changes with, planning decisions, and we don't quite talk about that connection. There's not really a language around it that compares with scientific language that we've got with hooded plovers or, sand dune processes. So, I'm kind of interested what your thoughts are on that, and or do you have links in Deakin that I can follow up on some of that work?
Yeah, there is language around it. It's not pure science, but it is scientifically based, or should I say evidence based. A lot of it is qualitative, and that is a highly valuable evidence. It just doesn't have to be numbers, and so there is a significant amount. Lizzie, beyond today, I can talk to the crew up in RMIT University. They've got a lot of this stuff. There's also a lot in the literature that I've got sitting here. You and others who are doing these things, and Pam here, she's in Coast Care along Brimley, and we're involved in a number of things. Constantly we need some evidence, and her professional area was qualitative evaluation. And she knows what constitutes evaluation and what constitutes evidence in a qualitative way. And one of her colleagues at Melbourne University, when she worked there in the evaluation unit, used photography. And so there is a whole raft of people in qualitative evaluation who use storytelling, photography, a whole lot of other mechanisms rather than scientific quantitative facts. But we can talk about that, and I can get you in touch with others, so that often you have to argue things beyond numbers. But a lot of these things are legitimate and are in very reputable journals.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Noel, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Lawry, I was wondering what your thoughts are on this religious fervour of some of the climate catastrophist cult. the Greta Thunbergs and so on of the world, they seem to be mentally disturbed to me.
Well, I can't comment.
Okay.
I mean, they're passionate. I think young people have every right to be passionate because it's their world. It's not the world I will be in. I mean, I'm aghast at, as Phil has said, and Ian, we've been involved in the Dell, and a lot of the permanent settlement boundaries that we want fixed are not fixed so much for tomorrow if the minister makes a favourable decision. They're fixed for 15 or 20 years. We've already got so many things in the pipeline. A lot of us will be dead. And so to get things moving, it's not surprising that young people are passionate. And she makes an argument. I like what I hear from her in terms of her passion and in terms of her trying to get young people connected. People ask me about, do you believe in climate science? I do. I have to trust. It's not my area of research. I have to trust the researchers, and it's the same on any health-related issue. If people say, "Oh, you're a dean of health," I'm not a clinician. I'm not a medical doctor, although we know we have a medical school and all these things. If I need to get information, I reckon I can go to the right people, the right organisations. For example, if family here or ourselves have any health issues, I go to the website of the Mayo Clinic. I go to the website of a number of our prestigious research institutes in Australia. So part of the thing is teaching people intellectual health around the information, where to get it, what the questions to ask. And sadly, we don't often have that capacity. Now, I'm trained in that. I used to do radio for the ABC, and I worked with John Fain for a while, and that was fine. But John used to ask me questions because there was talkback, and people had asked me questions, and I'm not going to give advice to an anonymous person over the airwaves. And so that was always a difficulty. But I didn't mind talking about some of the underlying things in the issue. But I worked really well with Ben Knight, who now reads the news. He used to do in Tasmania, and we had some fantastic people send his producer a little summary and a page, and then Ben and I'd have a conversation, and then he'd go to talkback, and the talkback was much stronger than on John Fain. So it's trying to get people to understand all the nuances of these things, and it's a long answer to your question, but we've got to have the passionate people that get the attention. Then we've got to get the people who enable the citizenry to get access to basic information. Sadly, we didn't do very well on that with COVID, with our main risk groups. You know, there were more of them than with AIDS. We didn't do it well with aged care. We didn't do it well with a whole lot of population groups, people from different cultures, et cetera, et cetera. So there will always be people speaking and highlighting and are passionate about the environment. But I've just come back from Central Australia, and for me, there was a different take on the environment by the Indigenous people there who described themselves, never used the word owners of the land. They talked about, we are custodians of this, and these are the things we're doing with this land, and they were showing us what they were doing. And they were talking about how a lot of the plants, fortunately, are still going and how they care for them, etc. So there's a whole lot of language and concepts that are complex. You get outbreaks around the margins to alert us. We've even got to unpack it with a little bit more thought.
Anyone else? No. Thanks very much, Lawry. That was really excellent. I thoroughly enjoyed that. You were very informative, and it was nice. It was a good perspective on stuff. And hopefully you might be able to join us at a later date to share more of your experience.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more stories. I mean, one story I'd love to tell you about, because a lot of you would have had kids, grandkids, etc., is my Girraween story.
Okay, you go for it.
Okay, okay, all right. It's a school in WA, and a school that was hopeless. And some years ago, after I'd finished as dean, I was asked by the Australian Council of Educational Research. There was a big Commonwealth-funded program called Mind Matters on what was called mental health, but it was social and emotional wellbeing. And it was given, excuse me, having the second phase of it was given to 14 schools around Australia that were considered hopeless. Girraween was one of these, school in the northern suburbs of Perth. It had never, ever had a year 12. And the profession that visited the school most to assist the school with the police, mainly coming in to investigate crime. They appointed a mathematician who always wore a grey suit and looked out of the arc as principal. Then they appointed a woman in her 40s and 50s, lots of experience, with tattoos all over her as deputy principal. And they said to the kids, we're not doing well here. You tell us what we need to do. And the kids were saying, you don't yell at us, and all the sorts of things. The attendance levels each day were appalling. So they negotiated with the students that the students would develop the school motto. They also asked the students, what would they like in the curriculum? We will do that for you, providing you turn up to classes in English, science, mathematics, etc., basic things, because you need to be equipped. The kids agreed. So I went to see this school in its infancy, and I saw some of the people that they brought in, breakdancing, Spanish flamenco. All kids wanted all sorts of interesting things. And the kids were starting to work. They had a mechanism where they taught them how to consult all the different year levels and then to come up with a school motto. The next time I went back in about 6 months' time, the school motto was designed by the kids in their art class, and it was in every classroom. We will come on time, we will come prepared, we will participate. Just 3 phrases. It wasn't about honour, we're a school of integrity, or like we've got in other parts. It was all about actions that they believed. And one of the things they negotiated with the school was that teachers should not yell at us. And if we do something wrong, we want to be warned. So they instituted a red card, yellow card system, like in a number of our sports. So I sat in classes where if some kids were not doing the right thing, the teacher, first step was to look at them for 10 seconds, not say anything, expressionless on the face, first warning. And if they continued, a little verbal warning. And then if it went further, it was the yellow card, which meant so many yellow cards, you got a red card. The red card, your parents came to the school for an interview. And the kids thought, there were hardly any red cards given. And so all these wonderful things were happening. They introduced music, arts, painting, drama. And incidentally, the research on that is dramatic. Schools that have more music, I've written it down here, more music, painting, drama, or all of the arts, actually get better educational outcomes than schools that don't. And so what's happened now around the world, a number of schools have reduced the curriculum on traditional subjects and put more into the creative arts area and building kids' connectedness. And they find the academic outcomes sometimes increase up to 18 to 20% with a reduction in teacher time in the traditional areas. So there's all sorts of incredible areas like that. So we've got great evidence about how to make changes in a lot of our school communities. Sometimes tradition reduces the opportunities to do it. And we need to attract more teachers from different areas, and we need to have the kids running the school. Final little thing, it's for all of us on this. Lots of international studies. Our health and well-being across those 6 areas improves the more connections we have vertically, in other words, with people of different ages, and horizontally, people in our same cohort. Now, sadly, COVID has trashed that, and we've had a significant number of reduction, and we're seeing some of the outcomes of that. So the more we can keep connections going, and the more schools actually, they now have buddy systems. They have kids in different age groups working with one another on projects, etc. So the research is really exciting about building one's health and well-being, and a lot of the activities are done in nature. You should see them in Scandinavia. The kids are hardly ever in the classroom, even in cold days. Long answer to a simple question.
Thank you very much, Lawry. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. I hope everyone else did too. Tonight's meeting has been videotaped and will be available on the web page as a link, and will probably be available on a Facebook page too in the next couple of days. Thank you, everyone, and I'll call the meeting closed.
Thanks,
Good
Andy.
night, all, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lawry. Thank you.